كلياته تحت عين سلوان. هذا النفق بيوصل للمسجد الأقصى المبارك. هذا محل بيشتغلوا فوق. هاي بلد ثاني. هاي بلد ثاني أول مرة بشوف مثل هيك. هذا كله تحت الأقصى. هذا كله تحت المسجد الأقصى المبارك. طلع المخططات اللي بيشتغلوا فيها. حسبنا الله ونعم الوكيل. هلا بدنا ننزل من نفق لنفق ثاني. هذا نفق علوي اللي كنا فيه. الآن نازلين على النفق السفلي. هذا المخطط الصهيوني من أجل هدم المسجد الأقصى المبارك، لأنهم يعتقدون أنه هيكل سليمان تحت المسجد الأقصى، وهذا النفق اللي احنا فيه بيوصلنا حتى نهاية هذا النفق يصل إلى المسجد القبلي صخرة.
ומעלה בשני המסגדים, מסגד אל-אקצא, שהוא השלישי בחשיבותו באסלאם. אנחנו מדברים על עשרות בודדות של אלפי רבים. אין דבר כזה. קוראים את המסגדים, ושני דברים, ראשית אתה מוחק את המלכות המסגדים, ואתה שם מקום לבנות את המסגדים.
גם זה בהתחלה. אבל שוב, בשיקול של האם לוותר על העניין, או לקחת, היינו צריכים כמות עצומה יחסית. ולא היה מקור אחר, לא העלינו בדעתנו מקור אחר. החלטנו לא להימנע מזה ולעשות. ועשינו.
Folks, you do not have to be Jewish to be helped by Chabad. You don't even have to be able to pronounce our name, because I've goofed a few times too. Remember the classic moment in To Have and Have Not when Lauren Bacall says to Bogey, "You know how to say Chabad, don't you? Just put the back part of your tongue against the soft palate and blow." If you, like so many others out there, find it easier to pledge $1,000 than pronounce Chabad, you're in good company. L'chaim.
We're here tonight to help Chabad. And what a beautiful word, Chabad. Gentiles have trouble saying Chabad. It's the chuch.
Habab, how do you say it?
Chabad, not habab.
Habab.
Okay, it's not a rodeo. Chabad, all right?
That's the noise I make when I get cream cheese stuck in my throat.
Easy.
Chabad House.
Chabad.
Shabbat Drug Rehabilitation Program.
The worldwide Chabad Lubavitch movement.
The Chabad Telethon.
Shabbat House.
And the place is not Shabbat, it's Chabad.
What do you want from me? I'm trying to pass.
Chabad is people helping people.
The Chabad Lubavitch community.
Congratulations, Chabad.
Chabad save lives.
Chabad. Did I get the cha right?
The Chabad Telethon.
It's a cha.
Cha.
Cha, there you go.
Cha.
When I say Chabad, my beard gets wet. Is that right?
Chabad doesn't think so.
Chabad brings nachas to us all.
I make a call to Chabad.
How much money have we raised on the lovely Chabad telethon?
Remember when I first came here, I said Chabad? Look how I've improved. Chabad. Only 4 years to say Chabad.
Chabad. Can't say Chabad. Yeah, that's right.
I said it in a sneeze. Chabad.
Big Star came here. He says, "I'm so thrilled to be here for Chabad." You know what I mean?
You know, last year I couldn't even pronounce Chabad. I thought it was a word you said to get rid of a tickle in your throat. But today, I not only can pronounce Chabad, but I also know that thanks to their love and dedication to humanity, there are thousands of families, regardless of race, color, or creed, who are alive and well and enjoying life because of a group of Hasidic Jews. I'll work on that word for next year.
אבל יצא צריך מגזר וברכה בהצלחה בכלל ולתמשיך רק לבקש בכל העניינים מה שישראל לאחרונה ישראל נמצאו כמה עניינים מה שלא יאות, וגם משהו שעדיין משאיר ליבו, אז הייתה משהו במה ידיעתו. הכנראה שהיא מספיק, כאילו שהיום כבר כמה שעות מגיע עדיין ליבו, אבל יש עוד כמה שעות, אבל יש להשתדל גם היום, בצורה טובה. זה שמחה וטוב לראות. כדי שחסידים מקפידים שכל מנהיגים את שמחה. תודה טובה, בהצלחה רבה.
Donald Trump has faced some serious backlash, as you know, for some of the things he has said on the campaign trail. But this morning, he could be in hot water for what he said under oath before running for office about his relationship with a convicted felon who once was tied to organized crime. ABC's chief investigative correspondent Brian Ross is here with that story. Good morning, Brian.
Well, good morning, Robin. With the possible exceptions of George Washington and Abraham Lincoln, American politicians have a well-established record of outrageous statements and stretching the truth. But in the case of Donald Trump, his critics now say he's crossed the line between stretching the truth and telling lies. Trump's statements about Muslims and the 9/11 attacks have raised the biggest questions about his truthfulness, including his unsupported and widely denied claim that thousands of Arabs in New Jersey celebrated after the attacks.
Thousands and thousands of people were cheering as that building was coming down.
Then Trump went after a reporter, Serge Kovaleski, who said Trump was wrong about the alleged New Jersey celebration, appearing to mock Kovaleski and his disability.
I don't know what I said. I don't remember.
Trump said he wasn't mocking the reporter because he did not know what he looked like.
I don't know him.
But the reporter said they met many times and were once on a first-name basis.
Raise your hand, please.
Now there are questions about what Trump said under oath in a civil lawsuit about one of the people who helped develop the Trump Soho Hotel and Condominium in New York City. The man on the right with Trump at the hotel launch party, Felix Sater, a twice-convicted felon once tied to organized crime in a massive stock scam, someone Trump now maintains he barely knows. In his videotaped testimony obtained by ABC News, Trump said he could not even recall what Sater looked like.
If he were sitting in the room right now, I really wouldn't know what he looked like.
But an ABC News investigation found Sater, an executive at a real estate company, was actively involved in a number of proposed deals with Trump. Here they were together in Denver in 2005. And in 2010, 3 years after Sater's mob ties became public, the Trump Organization issued Sater business cards identifying him as a senior advisor to Donald Trump, with a Trump Organization email address and phone number. Trump's lawyer says Sater was an independent broker, but no deals came out of it. Whatever the relationship, it appears to be very much a sore point for Trump.
Why didn't you go to Felix Sater and say, you're connected with the mafia, you're fired?
Well, 2 years ago, Trump cut short a BBC interview after being pressed about Sater.
I hate to do this, but I do have that big group of people waiting, so I have to.
Okay, now hold on, one last question.
Trump later said under oath he did not remember being interviewed by the BBC.
Okay. Do you recall doing the interview?
No, I don't.
Trump wouldn't agree to be interviewed by us at all about Sater and instead sent his lawyer who told us about the convicted felon. You can't do background checks on everyone, Robin.
But yet his numbers, Trump's numbers, continue to rise and rise and rise and stay strong.
Absolutely true.
Stronger than ever right now. Okay, Brian, thanks very much.
2 North Africans with Belgian passports and a letter of introduction from an Islamic group in London persuaded Massoud to give them an interview. They began with some unexpected questions. Why are you against Osama bin Laden? Why do you call him a killer? Each exploded a bomb, one in the camera and the other in a suicide belt. Massoud was dead.
شاید من اولین نفراتی بودم در دنیا که از موضوع مطلع می شدم. پرسش مهم این که چرا احمد شاه مسعود این گونه ترور شده و چرا اصلا ترور شده در این مقطع، چه اتفاقی افتاده که 2 نفر جان خودشون از دست دادن، 2 نفر نیروی حرفه‌ای.
Iranian intelligence judged that only al-Qaeda could have pulled off this complex hit. One obvious motive was to help their hosts, the Taliban. But it smelt of an international plot.
فکر می‌کردیم که آنچه که اتفاق افتاده پایان یک ماجرا نیست، آغاز یک ماجراست و فکر می‌کردیم که اتفاقات بیشتری در پیشه.
Masoud's other ally also smelled a rat.
Мы с президентом Бушем говорили, и я в разговоре с ним упомянул о том, что на днях был убит лидер Северного альянса в Афганистане Масуд. И я сказал тогда американскому коллеге, знаешь, меня это очень тревожит, такое чувство, что что-то должно произойти. Они явно к чему-то готовятся.
The next day was the 11th of September, 2001.
Thank you, friends. I now have the honor and distinct pleasure of introducing the man of the year, Mr. Felix Sater. You think you know Felix Sater. Let me tell you something you don't know. I have been Felix's friend and rabbi for 16 years. In the early years of our friendship, he would come to talk to me. He would tell me stories, and he would say that he needed someone to tell these things to. He would tell me about things he's done and he was involved in. I tell you, friends, these stories were strange and getting stranger with each passing month. Rabbi, you know what I did last week? I did this. And oh my God, you know where I was last week in such and such a place? And I'm thinking, sure, of course you did that. Do I really look like the type who's out there shopping for a bridge? I only recently told Felix I really didn't believe most of it. I thought perhaps he watched too many James Bond movies, read one too many Tom Clancy novels. Anyone who knows Felix knows that he can tell a good story. I simply did not put much credence to them. One fine day, 2.5 years ago, Felix invited me to join him at a private closed-door session in the Federal Building in New York. Only his immediate family members were allowed in, and he'd gotten special clearance for his rabbi to be there as well. I get there, and to my amazement, I see dozens of U.S. intelligence officers from all of the various three-letter intelligence agencies of this country, including some I had never even known existed. They're taking turns standing up one after the other, offering praise for Felix, praising him as an American hero for his work and his assistance in the highest levels of this country's national security interests. They were speaking about Felix Sater, my Felix. They're talking about his clandestine activities to help the government and protect our country. They elaborated in great detail, stuff that was more fantastic and more unbelievable than anything he had been telling me. I vividly recall one of the officers proudly stating, and I quote, Felix Sater probably saved tens of thousands of US lives, maybe even millions. He certainly saved the lives of thousands, if not of hundreds, if not thousands of US servicemen and women through the brave work that he's done, battling at the risk of his own life with this country's greatest enemies. Friends, I sat there open-mouthed. I was flabbergasted. Here I was listening to these stories for the past decade. To me, they were all Bubba Mises, Felix Mises, and here I am hearing them being said by federal agents about my Felix Sater. He wasn't just bragging, the stories I didn't believe, and I realized that he only told me 1/10 of what really went on. I'm not going to elaborate more because I'm not allowed to. I probably said more than I should. But I felt that it's important that I have to say something to tell the world and to tell you the rest of the story, to tell you the things about my dear friend Felix Sater that you won't read in the newspaper, but that I heard with my own ears, along with his family and a few others sitting here tonight. And just as he stood up then and risked his life for his country, possibly the fact that we're sitting here tonight in safety as a result of his efforts, he did the same at his Chabad. This Chabad so near and dear to all of us. He didn't have to. Each time I came to him, we were faced with a challenge. He always took it personally. Chabad's problem was his problem. He always did what he could and more to get us through the rough patches that we faced over the years. Last year we were faced with our most difficult year, Hurricane Sandy, and a mortgage issue that had to be addressed. He stepped up to the plate and rolled up his sleeve. And many people helped. Many of you sitting in this room tonight helped, and I'm most grateful to each of you. Felix took the lead. He did whatever had to get done. He didn't just do his fair share, he did whatever had to get done. He didn't just do what he had to do. He did what was needed. It's safe to say that during this recent challenge, Felix, you were the one that saved this Chabad house, the one that turned it around. So that we continue to thrive and do our work of spreading Yiddishkeit and goodness all around us. Felix, now you know the real reason why I wanted to name you Man of the Year. So I have the opportunity to tell this little bit of the Felix Seder that I know. I can tell you for sure, friends, if you're ever in a foxhole and you need a true friend, someone who's really committed to helping, when you're in a situation when there's no resolution and no way out, and you can pick one man to be there with you in that foxhole, in that situation, I'd pick Felix Seder any day of the week. Felix, I want to personally thank you for your dedicated service to your country. I want to personally thank you for your dedicated service to our Chabad. And yes, indeed, you are certainly without doubt the Man of the Year.
Bravo.
Felix isn't someone that you would describe exactly as the ultra-Orthodox Hasidic Jew. However, he and I have a special kinship. I call him in Russian my brat, my brother. A kinship because of our special relationship with the Rebbe, whom he met on a few occasions as a child. On one occasion, the Rebbe arrives at 770 and he's a little kid running around Eastern Parkway, and the Rebbe walks out, all the Hasidim are standing back, of course, and this little chutzpahnik walks up calmly to the rabbi, and the Rebbe stands and chats with him, apparently, for a number of minutes, to the amazement of all of the Hasidim. And I believe it was during that brief encounter, Felix, that the Rebbe connected with you in a very deep place. I believe, as he does, the Rebbe was blessing him and empowering him to do great things. Some of the great things he's already done for his country, for his people, and for tzedakah, and many, many more great things that still lie ahead in your future, as a Jew and as an American, as a philanthropist, as a leader and visionary. And tonight, friends, Felix will complete a Torah scroll commissioned by him in loving memory of his father, Reb Mordechai ben Yisrael Tevya Kohen, on the occasion of his just over 1 year yahrzeit. The Torah is here to be completed momentarily after he receives his award and gives his response. But a couple of days ago, he's a last-minute type of guy, as we know, a regular Chabadnik. He says, Rabbi, he calls me up on Thursday, Rabbi, you know, I have something I would like to do. What would it be? I have a wish, you know, this is a big mitzvah, writing a Torah. It's the last mitzvah of all 613. Not everyone gets an opportunity to do it. It's a big deal. I want the Rebbe to be part of this mitzvah. Wouldn't it be nice if we can take the Torah to the Rebbe's personal study in Brooklyn and fill in a couple of letters? And I start to sweat, because to get into that room is not easy. It's been locked and lock and key for 20 years. You have to know someone who knows someone else. It's Thursday night. The dinner is Monday. And you can't postpone it. You got to finish the Torah tonight. You got to do it before the dinner. I said, Felix, it's a nice dream. We'll try. P.S. We move mountains. The head of the entire Chabad movement had to make phone calls. And last night at 9:30 at night, myself and Felix and his friend Mandel Machkina here, along with Rabbi Klein, our scribe, walked into that holy room where so many poured out their hearts over the 40 years, so many received blessings, and we filled in letters in that Torah. Friends, this is something special, this modern American, if you will, secular Jew, had it in his heart. He just had to do it. I thank him for that once-in-a-lifetime opportunity which we shared. Felix, you know the Rebbe's watching over you tonight with miraculous blessings, showering you year after year. It's not a matter of faith, it's a simple fact. You also know as a fact that your Father is watching over us tonight and blessing you as you bless his soul with the amazing mitzvah of writing a Torah. Ladies and gentlemen, please help me to give a warm welcome to the man of the year, Mr. Felix Sater.
Thank Rabbi Paltiel for making me the man of the year. It's not something that I expected. The rabbi gave me the Rebbe's dollar. I owe him one back. A while back, he gave me one and to carry with me for safety, protection, for blessings. And I think that now that I have one that I could put in my house, which is like a mezuzah for the house, now my whole family can be protected and watched over. I'd like to give you back the one you had given me a few years ago for my protection.
Felix Sater is a multifaceted entrepreneur in New York City. His passion is large real estate development projects, and Felix has been an advisor for many large companies worldwide, in addition to starting several of his own. Felix is also an avid philanthropist and angel investor, and is always looking for new and exciting projects. But business isn't everything. Felix is also a proud husband and father, and is very active in the Chabad of Port Washington. His philanthropic causes focus on charities and causes he personally cares about. To view more, please visit felixsater.com, felixsater.net, and felixsater.org. Thanks for stopping by.
Special counsel Bob Mueller has subpoenaed the Trump Organization to turn over documents, some of which we believe are related to Russia. Well, we know that. We know it's one of the search terms in the subpoena. Our next guest is a Russian-born American citizen and a businessman affiliated with the Trump Organization who tried to broker a deal between Trump Organization and authorities in Moscow to build Trump Hotel. It didn't happen, but it is certainly important to this overall story and the Russia probe. Joining us now is that man, Felix Sater. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you, Chris, for having me.
Now, first thing I tend to ask people in these situations are, you have made the decision to come forward and speak. Why? Because ordinarily, counsel will advise people, don't talk until this is all over. But you want to speak now. Why?
Some documents have been unsealed about my work with the various national security agencies on behalf of our country. And I was approached by two reporters who said, there are pieces of this that are coming out, and it's going to come out. And you have to sit down and tell the truth. Otherwise, it's going to get piecemealed. And after 20 years of work protecting our country, I didn't want it to come out the wrong way, and I wanted to give a full picture of everything that I've done in protecting our country.
So there is this whole intelligence asset slash spy story that goes along with your involvement here. And it's interesting, and we'll talk about it. But it is interesting to me that that's motivating you to come out on not all these other questions that have been swirling around about you. To this point, whom have you gone and spoken to from the government about your involvement with Trump and any potential connections to Russia? Have you talked to Mueller's investigators? Well, I'm not at liberty to discuss any ongoing investigations that the U.S. government may be having. Well, you can say who you've spoken to. They usually direct you not to talk about the content of what you've discussed. Without checking of what I can and can't say or where I can and can't discuss, speaking about existing investigations, I can only say that I have, in fact, testified in front of the Senate, in front of the House Intel Committee, but the rest of it I can't discuss until it actually comes out. But that does lead to the conclusion that if you don't say that I haven't spoken to the Mueller investigator, because certainly you could tell me if you haven't, right? There's no penalty to saying I didn't speak to Mueller's investigators. So if you're not telling me I haven't spoken to the investigators, the assumption is that you have. Do you allow that analogy? It's an interesting analogy. Most important analogy is I was doing a real estate transaction in Moscow. But let me just clear this up. Sure. If you don't want to talk about it, that's fine. But let me just go back. I cannot answer about anything that may be an ongoing investigation. True, except you could say if you haven't spoken to the investigators. You could say that because then there's no relevant information that you could compromise. Then I guess I want to say I choose not to. Okay. All right, so now let's talk about why they would be interested in you. All right, if the information about this subpoena is accurate and they want to know about this Trump Tower deal, part of the intrigue there is how it was explained by you in an email. Yes. That this could be something where we'll get Putin on board and he'll help bring our boy, as you were describing, then candidate Trump, help him win. You know, our boy can become president of the United States. We can engineer it. I will get all of Putin's team to buy in on this. I'll manage this process. It is provocative of the idea that Russia was trying to help elect this man president. Is that the truth of the matter asserted? Chris, I came here as a 7-year-old immigrant. I grew up in this country. Went to elementary school, junior high school, high school. I believe I'm the furthest thing from Russian. In fact, I wasn't even born in Russia. I was born in the Soviet Union, which has, thank God, since collapsed. The email that I wrote was to a friend that I knew since childhood, Michael Cohen. The excitement about having had worked with someone who is now running for president, especially for an immigrant kid like myself, I was beyond enthusiastic about it. In terms of who would and would not have gotten on board, I was trying to use this opportunity because I had tried to build Trump Towers in Moscow, as well as London and Paris and a whole bunch of other cities. And you did licensing agreements involving the Trump name also, which was a huge revenue flow. Absolutely. I did it in New York. I did it in Fort Lauderdale. I tried to do it in Phoenix, Arizona. I worked on numerous Trump deals in my career. But what does that have to do with whether or not this was true? Was this true, what you were saying, that you had some access to Putin and that he had an interest in trying to help Trump? I don't know Putin. I've never met him. But if this deal was going forward, I certainly would have started working the phones as a real estate developer, which, as I've said on a previous interview, is 3 parts enthusiast, 1 part realist. You look at a piece of dirt and you envision a beautiful building standing in front of you. Building of that size, tallest building in the world, or the tallest building in Europe, as what I envisioned and what we were trying to accomplish, you would have needed buy-in from governments, from finance institutions, from architects and everybody else. And the truth of the matter is, had this project moved forward, of course, I would have started working the phone, started contacting my business contacts. But you didn't know anybody close to Putin or connected to Putin who was telling you they wanted to help Trump become president of the United States? No, I did not. And you didn't have any knowledge of any government actor in Russia who wanted to help get Trump elected president? I wouldn't involve myself with a government actor of any other government against our country for any reason, Donald Trump or anyone else. So this was just hype and enthusiasm. It wasn't a legitimate offer. That's what you're saying now. This was beyond enthusiasm. But it wasn't hype.
Because at the end of the day, if the project was moving forward, believe me, I'd start working the phones, I'd start calling business people, I'd start finding people that knew Putin, I'd start finding people that could get Donald on top of this project. I would have, believe me, turned over every rock to make sure that everyone was involved.
I get you, but look, the danger in the suggestion is that it would be proof that there were people connected to Putin or close to Putin that had a vested interest in trying to help motivate Trump's campaign. If you're saying that that's not what it was about, we'll take you at your word until any other proof comes up about it.
I am more than happy for all of the proof to come out. I was trying to build a $1 billion project.
And it didn't happen, right?
It did not happen, no.
And so there was never money exchanged. There was never any type of relationship developed in this regard between Putin or anyone close to him and the Trump organization, to your knowledge?
To my knowledge and anything that I was involved with, absolutely not.
Because Michael Cohen says he never even went to Russia on this deal. Is that true?
He did not go to Russia on this deal with me.
Okay. And the idea that you went to Russia with Trump's children to advance business interests, is that true?
That is true.
Because you know that the GC, the General Counsel of the Trump Organization, says it's not true. Felix was just in Russia at the time that the kids were there. It wasn't coordinated. Is that true?
The president asked me to be in Russia at the same time as them, to look after them.
The president asked you?
Yes, sir.
Directly?
Directly.
Why do I ask you? Because the president has seemed to distance himself from you and says if the guy was in this room right now, I wouldn't really know who he was. Is that true?
I'm sorry, you'd have to ask the president why he said that.
Well, but is that true? Do you think if you were in a room with the president, he would know who you are?
You'd have to ask the president. I'm sorry.
I'm asking you. If he was in this room right now, do you think he'd think there's a better chance that that guy standing over there is Felix Sater than you?
If he was in this room, I'd know who he was, but I can't answer for him.
Why are you being so protective?
I'm not being protective.
You have a business card. Everybody knows you had residence in Trump Organization. We know a lot of the same people here in New York City. I've looked into you. There is no question that whether it was when you were with Bayrock back in the early 2000s and you went to Trump and started doing licensing deals for him and then other commercial opportunities, or when you got back into the business after some hard times, you were in residence at the Trump Organization and had a business card that called yourself a senior advisor.
I didn't call myself as a senior advisor. The Trump Organization issued me that business card.
Fine. But you know Donald Trump, yes or no?
I know Donald Trump.
You have met him in person?
Yes, sir.
You have shaken his hand?
Many times.
You've looked him in the eye?
Yes, sir.
You've spoken to him on the phone?
Yes, sir.
He knows you. Why? Felix, I'm telling you, if you want to tell the truth, you got to follow through on these kinds of things.
I'm telling you
because we're living in this age where people don't know, what's fact and fiction anymore. Either you know the guy or you don't.
Chris, you're asking me about what someone else said. I will not answer what somebody else said. I can only answer for myself.
But it's the President of the United States, and him saying, I don't know who this guy is, smacks of trying to distance himself from facts. And that's why I'm asking you, Felix. It's not to bust your chops. It's just to try to create a record of what we should actually know in this situation. So that's why I'm asking. Similarly, another big point of intrigue is that you meet with your friend Michael Cohen and somebody else. He takes the meeting because he knows you, Cohen says.
Yes.
And at the meeting, you make a proposal for a Ukrainian peace, right?
Yes.
And this is what we need to do to stop it. Here's a proposal. You give it to Michael and you say, would you deliver this to Michael Flynn? Is that the truth of what happened at that meeting?
Close. I gave the proposal to Michael Cohen, who said he would deliver it to Michael Flynn.
And what was in that proposal? What was that about?
The proposal was, I was working at that time on a very large deal to fix and rehabilitate the nuclear power plants in the Ukraine, which are basically Chernobyl ready, which could cause catastrophe. The funny part is it was the most anti-Russian transaction you could possibly work on because it was a way for Ukraine to become energy independent from Russia, as well as sell excess energy over to Poland and the other Eastern European countries, which are now in the chokehold of Russian energy policy.
Who was the other man at the table?
Andrei Artemenko, who was a senator from the Ukraine.
Is it true that he has connections to oligarchs in Russia and people who move money in ways that the U.S. doesn't accept?
I'm sorry, I don't know. I just don't know. I really don't know.
Is it true that he had business interests involved with what was going to happen in the Ukraine?
I'm sure he does have business interests, but he had approached me through a business contact about the power plant deal, and that's all I was working on. And the power plant deal would have caused Russia basically to collapse, so it was the most anti-Russian deal ever. During the course of all of those negotiations, and working on the nuclear power plants, Andrei comes to me and says, Felix, people are being killed in eastern Ukraine.
It's true. I've been there. It's true. When that plane got shot down and people thought that that was the beginning of the situation, it was obviously an introduction into an ongoing civil war that's there that is largely motivated by Russian resources. So that is the reality there. Do you know if anything ever happened with the administration and that proposal?
I don't know. As far as where my involvement ended was, Andrei said to me, we're working on this deal, but people are getting killed. I have a proposal for a peace plan. It's a way to sort of break the logjam of Crimea, because Russia's never leaving Crimea. Sanctions will never be lifted while they're in Crimea. I think that sort of a Hong Kong-style transaction where Hong Kong is independent for 50 years and they vote on their own independence and who they want to attach to. Can you get this to the administration? To which I answered, no, I could get it to Michael Cohen, and he's close to the administration.
And that's as far as it went, as far as you know?
And that's as far as it went, as far as I was concerned.
Let me ask you one other thing, because once this is all settled, you need to come back on and tell people your story about your involvement with the American government, because it's very fascinating on its own, and it will surprise some people. However, there's a connection to that in the last question, which is this. What insight can you offer as to why Donald Trump, a man you know very well, regardless of what he says, is so anxious to take on opponents, so anxious to be strong, be forceful, and to be seen that way, but not when it comes to Russia? Why, when it comes to Russia, does he always have a light touch?
The conversations that I have had with the president many years ago about Russia were not about a light touch. Were not about coddling them. It was about bringing U.S. oil down to $25 a barrel, which would spark an economic revival in this country unseen in the last 100 years, and at the same time, cripple Russia. So suggestions of him liking them, I don't know. From my conversations, I know that it was always the idea of make America have an amazing economic resurgence and cripple Russia in the process. Those are the conversations I remember.
Felix, there's a lot more to your story, but we wanted to allow you to create a record on these suggestions that are out there about you with respect to the Russia probe. Again, there's more to the story, and we'll continue this conversation. Thank you for this first step. Appreciate you being here.
It's truly an honor to be standing in front of all of you, to be given this award, to be given this recognition. It's an honor to serve on this board of this organization. The people that are on the board are amazing human beings. Rabbi Paltiel has described most of them to you here. Other than just the board members, there's a lot of people who make this place run so that people could come, so that they could pray, so that they could cry when they have bad moments, thank God for good moments. And I think that the most important thing that a person could have, and especially a Jew, is this feeling of what I hope I have, or at least I strive to have it, something called tikkun olam, which is repair the world or make it a better place than you found it. I truly hope that in the very distant future, when I'm no longer here, that somebody will look and say, he did. And I think that that's probably my connection to the Rebbe, who I met as a child a few times. As you all know, I'm not a very religious person, but I feel I have a connection. I always go to the Rebbe's gravesite. I always ask for things, and I always seem to wind up getting them. My life has been beyond interesting. My wife says living with me is like reading next week's newspaper today. I'm a little choked up, so it's kind of hard, but I wanted to thank all of you for this amazing honor. And I think that the Rebbe had a very special place, and he has a very special place in my heart. And I think that the Chabad organization, which is now everywhere in the world that you look, it's there.
This one plays out like a mafia movie, a year-long campaign to silence witnesses, including a $500,000 bribe, a guy who wore a wire in order to catch the bad guys, all in order to make those sex abuse charges just disappear. And it's all playing out in the ultra-Orthodox community in Williamsburg, Brooklyn.
A coterie of people in the community that are hell-bent on intimidating.
Brooklyn District Attorney Charles Hines is aggressively pursuing 4 Hasidic Jews who he says are trying to bribe and intimidate witnesses in a sex assault case. The 4 Williamsburg Hasidim were hit with a laundry list of charges for allegedly offering a $500,000 bribe to a couple to make a sex assault charge just go away, even intimidating them to leave New York and go back to Israel so the district attorney's office would have no case.
They know that their children are thrown out of yeshiva schools. They can lose their apartment.
All 4 pleaded not guilty in court today, and each made bail, some of it as high as $75,000.
They are obviously going to be fighting these cases vehemently, and they're looking forward to the day in court.
The DA says Abraham Rubin is the ringleader, charging him with bribery and witness tampering and coercion.
Rubin is charged with offering $500,000 to the outcry witness and the victim to basically disappear.
Hertzka, Joseph, and Jacob Berger were charged with coercion and harassment and criminal mischief for destroying signage on a kosher store owned by the boyfriend of the woman who was allegedly molested, as well as for making threatening phone calls. What do you think about the charges? The sect of ultra-Orthodox Jews is extremely insular, shying away from all media coverage. But tensions in the community were evident during a recent community gathering to raise defense funds for 53-year-old Nehema Weberman, who was accused of molesting a girl now 17 for 3 years. Many others protested protecting this accused abuser. And this is part of a concerted effort by the district attorney and the NYPD in order to get into this ultra-Orthodox community and help flush out pedophiles and rapists and other people who sexually assault women and young children. Since this initiative started in 2009, 139 have been prosecuted, while the DA says that witnesses are being kept completely anonymous. In downtown Brooklyn, I'm Kirsten Cole with Pix 11 News.
Kkhabadi Jihadis say, yeah, this is real hair, just not mine. You want me to say what on that camera? I didn't put on any makeup yet today. What do you mean, how did I become a Rebbitzin? I married a rabbi. Baruch Hashem. You should date her.
Don't be a mensch.
Are they getting married?
Be a good Yiddish boy.
I shouldn't be hearing this. We're laughing at this, but that's funny. Hello? Mazel tov.
Are you good with the kids?
Is the Lichmenschen yet?
Do you change diapers?
Shabbos over yet? What a shidduch. Which Chabad are you going to? You can bring so much peace and love in your family with a Shabbos candle.
It's not just Trump that is connected to Chabad Lubavitch. Chabad Rabbi Ber Lazar is the chief rabbi of Russia. He is very close to President Vladimir Putin. The Jewish oligarchs at Putin's side are also the main financiers of Chabad Lubavitch. Jews control the wealth of Russia, and Chabad is a dominant force. They're not going anywhere. If this offends you, know that there are Russians who agree with me. Chabad can say whatever they want about Gentiles. Meanwhile, Putin is making it illegal to criticize them. A taxi driver in Russia was sentenced to 350 hours of community service for writing online that Jews dominate Russia and the world. Imagine what would happen if we were in Russia. Putin passed a law sentencing Holocaust deniers to 5 years in prison. Russia is virtually free of anti-Semitism. Putin is calling for Jews to emigrate to Russia. Jews destroy your country. Why would Putin be welcoming them into Russia? That's because they're not a threat. They've already destroyed Russia with Marxism and took it over 100 years ago. It's the West which they are currently destroying with cultural Marxism so that they can take it over. As Putin's Rabbi Beryl Lazar puts it, the West lacks mutual respect, unlike Russia. Putin was Israel's Person of the Year in 2015, despite working with Syria and Iran. Reuven Rivlin, the president of Israel, says that Putin is loyal to Israel's security. If you read the comments on RT's videos, you might actually believe that Putin is against Israel. But Putin's rabbi Beryl Lazar says that ties with Israel have never been closer. Israel has a simple message. We don't put all our eggs in one basket. We don't rely only on America. Putin is arming the Arab and Muslim states and working with Israel exactly as the Soviet Union was doing. He's profiteering from the war in Syria. He's not there because he wants to defend Christianity. That's literally KGB propaganda. Putin supported Israel during their 2014 bombing campaign of Gaza. Chief Sephardic Rabbi of Israel, Yitzhak Yosef, said to Putin, "According to the Jewish tradition, your leadership is decided by the kingdom of God, King of the world, and therefore we bless you. Blessed is the one who gave of his glory to flesh and blood." The Sanhedrin contacted Breaking Israel News to announce that the election of Trump, who has promised to recognize Jerusalem as the capital of Israel, coupled with Putin's expressed desire for the temple to be rebuilt, prompted the Jewish court to send a letter offering the two the opportunity to act as modern-day Cyrus figures, non-Jewish kings who recognize the importance of Israel and the temple. An Israeli bystander called out in Russian, "Welcome, President Putin." Putin approached the man who explained the importance of the Temple Mount and the Jewish temple. Shadrei Sharadim, an Orthodox Hebrew news site, reported that Putin responded, "That's exactly the reason I came here, to pray for the temple to be built again." Putin's on our side, says Beryl Lazar. Chabad Lubavitch, who is pushing to rebuild the temple in Jerusalem, wields tremendous influence in both Russia and Israel. When Ben-Gurion announced plans to rule the world from Jerusalem, calling for a world alliance and no more wars, that always included Russia. Some people will say, "Oh, but the Jewish media is against Russia." That media isn't pushing Israelis to go to war with Russia. It's pushing Americans to fight a war that they are not going to win. As you've heard earlier, the rabbis want a large war. When the dust settles, Putin will be fine, whereas the United States will be bled dry just like Germany after World War I and the Treaty of Versailles. Israel will take its place as the new superpower. There's so much more to this.
Oh my gosh, they're such a nice family. Be sure to say hi for me.
Let me tell you about mikvah. I think I need to fix my shaitel. Isn't it the perfect color for me? chicken is not enough. Do you have a stomachache? Do you want some Advil? Tylenol? Is the cholent too sweet? Motrin? Excedrin? Too spicy? Tums? Would you like some Kugel? Tums works wonders.
That was the question, like, why didn't he just pull out of the ship at that time? Because it was in such a dark space that
I like to believe modern Israeli culture is certainly influenced by Jewish culture. We study the Hebrew Bible here, and we also devote time to Talmud study. Talmud is really composed of two documents. One is this code developed in the 3rd century called the Mishnah, and the discussions that built around that text in the 200 years after, what we call the Gemara. The relevance goes on. We have to constantly reapply and rethink, but there's wisdom there that seems to transcend time.
The Talmud itself is a 600-year argument of the rabbis where they argue about what the law should be based on the Bible. And then how you study that argument is through argument.
You definitely feel it, that there's some type of, it's between two entities when it happens.
And that seems to make more complicated the issue of the Shliach Tzibur.
God is speaking through them. They're still speaking to the community. And I know that.
When you come from a textual tradition that says, well, read it differently, read it a new way. What else can we learn? We're not going to assume that the guy who's been here for 40 years has all the answers. We're not going to assume that my job is simply to do what I'm told. We're not going to say that as long as we all say the same thing, then we'll be okay. But we're going to bring those values of questioning and complexity and creativity.
The process of debating and arguing was partly how do you apply these ideas to the world as it gets more modern. The seeds of it are in the Bible itself. Let's say, just for example, the story of Abraham. God's about to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah. Just wipe them out, kill everybody. And Abraham starts arguing with him. What, you're going to destroy these cities. What if there were 50 righteous people? And God says, oh no, I wouldn't do it if there were 50. Well, what if there were 40? And so on. They're not just arguing with itself, arguing with God, that's pretty radical, but over morality. I mean, God is the source of morality. Here he's arguing with God over morality. So if Abraham can argue with God, so of course we're going to argue with the CEO from Intel or whatever. We won't be afraid of that.
It makes perfect sense to me that there's this marriage between innovation and ideology, because I think people need a vision. They're not just doing something for themselves, but they're helping build the country. There's a vision of making society better, of improving life, of doing something meaningful. Making money is not enough.
People are trying to explain what's going on in Israel, referring to the technology or to the military or to budgets or education. All of it is true, but all of it are the fuel. The question is, what is the spark plug? Because you have all these components all over the world. You have them in Germany, you have them in Japan. It's not enough. You need something else, and the something else has to do with things like culture, virtues, aspirations, the human component. And I think this is something which is very special to Israel. They wake up in the morning, they have madness in their eyes. So when you look on the Startup Nation or when you look on the explanation, this is part and parcel of our DNA.
by the sea. Ain't nowhere to run to. There ain't nothing there for free. Copper on the corner, needing for a drink, yeah. Drunk, lying on the sidewalk, bleeding in the rain. Good people at their faces, and they are their eyes, yeah. God, the city is dying, and they don't know why. Oh, Baltimore, ain't it hard just to leave? Oh, Baltimore, ain't it hard just to leave? Just to leave. Got my sister Sandy and my little brother Ray, yeah. Buy a big old wagon to haul us all away. Live out in the country where the mountains are. Hey, I'm never going back there till the day I die. Whoa, oh, Baltimore, ain't it hard just to leave? Oh, Baltimore, ain't it hard?
So you say the Renaissance was a pivotal time where Christianity was weakened and usury became prevalent.
Yes, Talmudic Judaism, as distinguished from the Israelite religion of the Old Testament, permits it as well under a number of escape clauses and loopholes.
Well, you've mentioned the Talmudic Jews, and it seems they are in control of the Jewish world and indeed the whole world. I don't know how many people share that view, and I wonder if there's anything that can be done, because we're seeing mass killings throughout the world. I'm mostly a geopolitical website.
We have secular liberal Zionists in the United States who want a velvet glove on Israeli policy. And then we have the Orthodox Judaics who are followers of the Talmud, of course, such as the most powerful politically in the United States, Chabad Lubavitch, and they want the velvet glove taken off. So they work hand in hand, secular Zionism. After all, the Israelis were born in a secular, almost communist ambiance in the Middle East in 1948. On May Day in Jerusalem, on May Day in the late 1940s and early 50s, the streets and boulevards were filled with red flags and communist and socialist types of organizations. And since that time, because the Israelis are essentially chameleons and can morph into any number of representations of themselves, since that time, in particular as America has become more conservative, then the conservative face of the Israelis have come forward, and we see a greater rise in the Orthodox and in what is known as the religious nationalist settler version of the Talmud. And so I don't feel that there is a universal control over the world here, but I think that there is great power in the West, and I also believe there are alliances. For example, I question the extent to which the Saudi Arabians are fulfilling certain Zionist goals, particularly in attacking Syria and in agitating for an attack on Iran. And I also wonder the extent to which groups like Al-Qaeda are actually funded and directed far at the high levels, far in the recesses of the organization by Western intelligence.
Absolutely. You know, you mentioned the Chabad Lubavitch and with a velvet cover, without, and it didn't really, I'm not clear exactly what that meant, but I want to ask you, they have an office in just about every country in the world. It's on their website. They've got their fingers in many pies, which would support my argument that, in fact, Talmuds are in control. I mean, what do you think they're doing with offices in every country in the world? You know?
Well, it's exactly what you're suggesting here, is that there is great political influence that's being applied, particularly in Washington, D.C., and in London and in Paris, the traditional areas where there has been an alliance with Judaism since the late 19th century, although there's been some hiccups along the way. And yes, it's an organized political power. It's also a recruiting base, because they're trying to transform Judaic people from secular liberal Zionists or even non-Zionists, because after all, in the 19th century we saw the rise of the Haskalah movement, which created Reform Judaism, which was a way of trying to temper some of the more extreme facets of the Babylonian Talmud, partly to present a more humane face to the Western world and therefore better infiltrate the Western world. But also there were some sincere Judaics who really felt that the Talmud was, as I feel, was a something that detracted from the life of Judaic people, detracted from their spirituality, detracted from their highest potential and destiny. And so, as a result of that, you had the Reform movement created, and one of the goals, to answer your question, of Chabad Lubavitch is to re-enslave Judaic people back into that frum allegiance to those texts. And therefore, the Chabad Lubavitch program is twofold. One, to influence the governments of the West, as they've been very successful in doing in Washington, D.C., whether you're talking about Obama or George W. Bush. And secondly, to create recruiting bases around college campuses and in cities in the United States, and I'm sure this is true in Europe or even Russia, where there is a preponderance of Judaic people, and attempt to convert them from their secularism to observance of the various Talmudic and rabbinic rules and regulations.
Well, you know, the Talmud, I presume, has great respect for love and compassion, or Judaism does, but it seems to have a total disregard for criminality, because Judaism today is really just a criminal network.
Mr. Dawson, how are you?
I'm alright. It's 6 a.m. I got my handbrake software working on the video I just did, and I saw you on Skype, so I gotta squeeze in interviews when I can.
Right. Well, hey, I appreciate you making time. Basically, I just wanted to, introduce myself to you. I've been aware of your work for quite some time, a long-time YouTube sub, and I decided to embark on a project and realized there's only a handful of people that really understand the angle I want to approach these two events, and I think you're one of them. And I've got a litany of questions, just very detailed.
It's about 9/11 in Iraq, right?
Yes, and I want to know,
are the two events connected, and they should be, and often they're separate for some reason.
Right, and I'm in my early 30s now, so I was a teenager during the W era with the Iraq War, 9/11, and the liberals, they God bless their sweet little hearts, they banged on the empire and war for oil, but nobody ever connected the Israeli angle and how Sharon and Bibi wanted the war. And this 9/11 story is totally absurd.
And Jewish neocons that wrote policy papers for Israeli prime ministers wrote the script and all the lies from the OSP about the war.
Right. Now, a lot of these details. Fife, Wormser, Ladine, Pearl, Bush and Sharon. What was their relationship like? All these little details. I do not know them, but I know enough of the big picture to know that I need to dig into these angles more, and I think you can help me understand.
I can debunk the oil stuff too. I mean, our oil exports didn't change post-war, and oil prices went up dramatically. It wasn't a war for oil.
Right.
It was, well, in a sense,
Right.
it kind of was. Israeli oil, their exports went up dramatically. They got 77% of their imports was all from Iraq and all from the Kurdish region that they created after balkanizing Iraq into sectarian factions of Shia, Kurdish, and Sunni. That was all the way up until 2017 when the Peshmerga was pushed out because of the Syrians and the Iraqis fighting against ISIS. The Kurds, which have, carved up a piece of Syria and had already carved up a piece of Iraq, got pushed out last October, 2 Octobers ago now. Once Obama was gone and the U.S. Air Force wasn't protecting them, the Iraqi army had them out within 3 days, and all that oil flow ceased. But Israel was getting 77% of its oil imports from Iraq, post-Iraq war. The American imports don't change at all. The price changed, but the imports are about the same as before. And there is the Oil for Food program between the two Gulf Wars where hundreds of thousands of children were starving to death, which everybody was aware of. And they just, were saying the price is worth it, and you've heard it. So they already had control over the oil. It had nothing to do, and none of the reasons for the Iraq war relied on that. It was weapons of mass destruction, right? Legally, it was to enforce a UN resolution, which is laughable because other countries break them all the time, but it was UN Resolution 1441, which stipulated they couldn't have or use WMDs since they lost the first Gulf War. That was one of the stipulations, and turns out they weren't. But there was a whole long list of lies about nuclear weapons, chemical weapons, biological weapons that came from these neocons that were stovepiped through the USP and used, and Bush, reiterated it, and that was the legal reason for the war. Colin Powell went to the UN with a mock vial of anthrax, remember that? And it does tie back to 9/11. I'm glad you asked me about this because most 9/11 films or whatever, they just focus on physics, and a lot of them kind of get pretty goofy, actually. And you're not seeing, regardless of what you think about 9/11, conspiratorial-wise, there is no doubt that the September 11th attack was erroneously tied to Iraq when Iraq had nothing to do with 9/11.
Right. Now, I know a lot of that, and gosh, it's been years since I listened. I was a big listener, which I don't really care for him much personally, and I think he slandered a lot of people now looking back, but I was reading David Icke, Alex Jones, Jeff Rentz type stuff as a late teen, and then
that's their target audience is late teens.
Yeah, well, that makes sense in my case, but I stumbled upon a few
They're
things
here's
that kind of pointed me in the right direction.
P.S. Ghosts and aliens.
Yeah, the rent stuff. Yeah. But I am the witness.com. I got into that in 05, 06, and Eric Huffschmidt, and that's how I found out about a lot of other
Those
people.
guys smeared me. Called me a pedophile and all this crazy stuff.
Really?
Yeah. It was
Okay,
Daryl
well-
Bradford Smith and Hutch Schmidt and Chris Bolin. Chris Bolin wouldn't even have 9/11 stuff if he hadn't ripped it off from my forum.
Really?
All he did
That's
was steal my
interesting.
work about Israel, then added all this goofy stuff to it, like saying a missile at the Pentagon. He's a plagiarist. Michael Collins Piper hated his guts because far more than myself, he ripped off Michael Piper all the time. He just took Piper books and rewrote them and made them his own. That guy's a piece of shit.
Well, here's the interesting thing. Now, we talked privately just before this interview about a man named Bill Cooper down in New Mexico, who they
an old friend of mine.
Yeah, they murdered Bill. And one of the things I noticed when I read Bill's work yesterday, and Eustace, I apologize, it was yesterday for the first time.
Really?
Yes, it was. I've only been doing this stuff for a year, Eustace.
Oh, I see.
And now here's the interesting thing. My research brought me to where I am today with this knowledge, independent of both yourself and Bill Cooper. In other words, all three of us came to the same conclusion independently.
Well, that's very good. And
well, it is very good.
Have too.
I mean, it's irrefutable that I arrived at the Zionists based upon my research. And when I read Bill Cooper's work, it was almost identical to what I believed. And I said, this man years ago was brought to the same conclusions I've been brought to. And I'm wondering, how come Bill couldn't get traction back in that time? And we know they murdered him, but what was the real reason they got rid of him? Is it because he was starting to get an audience for his information?
He was getting an audience, and he was well respected, and he was building a reputation. Bill was a hard worker, and he worked all the time. He and I were in London together for a meeting some years ago, and we had a great time over there.
Well, you know, the last time we were on the radio together, we discussed Ben Friedman and we discussed Myron Fagan.
Oh, yes.
But they're really wonderful researchers to set up for the truth. They don't necessarily tell the details of present-day America and present-day what things that are happening in the world. So what do you think is going on right now? Are they interested in a government centered out of Israel, out of Jerusalem?
Oh, that's the idea. That's what the state of Israel is set up for. That's the ancient crossroads of the world. And of course, we have our troops now in ancient Babylon, Baghdad, which everything is coming full circle right now.
Well, the interesting thing they said in Bill's book was that, and this is where it parallels with my research, it comes down to a group of rabbinical handlers working around a figurehead Messiah.
Oh, yes.
And that's exactly what Bill said years ago. And you know, that's the place we've been brought to as well. And when I came to that conclusion, I thought it was so outlandish and so ridiculous that I couldn't even start to fathom what that was the actual fact. And I started really investigating those facts. And yes, in fact, it comes out of the Ashkenazi Jewish sect, and it comes out of the beginnings were, I guess, in the Frankist era, but have moved along through time into a very Kabbalistic and very it's a Talmudic tradition and a Zohar tradition. Am I right?
Oh, exactly. And it's based on numerology and all sorts of Kabbalistic tricks.
Now, does that stuff have any validity in your mind? I mean, you know, I've had people talk to me, Eustace, that said to me that these people can actually do some of the stuff that's claimed. And I thought it was bunk.
Oh, it's absolute bunk. They really claim to be able to do black magic, and they can't do a damn thing. What it is a carnival sideshow for the suckers.
That's what I thought it was, too, and I called it Booga Booga.
That's exactly what it is. So, what they try to intimidate people into believing that they can do all this black magic, and it's not true. They've never been able to do it. If they had, we wouldn't even be here.
Well, can I ask you another question? I know that the American government has been very active in creating these false stories about UFOs and they're behind this whole UFO movement, aren't they?
Oh, yes. Well, it's all part of terrorism because they like to terrify the people that these aliens are going to come swoop down from Mars and take over the planet next week, so there's nothing anybody can do about it.
So anybody with a brain who's looked into this and who continues to promote UFO stuff is either off their rocker or part of a disinformation squad.
Well, my audience used to ask me if I'd ever seen a UFO, and I said, no, I have never seen one, and neither has anyone else.
I love you, Eustace. You're the best. You know something, Eustace? You and I have parallel thoughts here. I mean, everything. And what I've been doing, trying to get people away from some of the sites that UFO stuff is on, have been mixing some truth with their UFOs. In other words, they're putting UFO information along with some accurate information to create a straw man system where they can deny the whole thing as being real.
Well, that's the oldest trick in the book, give you a little bit of sugar with the medicine, you know.
Well, it seems to have worked for many people, and
it works on just about everybody.
Well, it hasn't worked on me. Why is that, Eustace?
Well, I think you and I have a strain of native common sense that can be touched, and that's what brings us through.
Well, I think you're probably right about that, because as I told you, I started my investigation a year ago knowing almost nothing, and it brought me to where I am today. And one of the things that happened when I was on the radio last week was I began to mention a group of Kabbalists, a specific group, and boy, when I did that, all hell broke loose.
Oh, yeah.
For me and for others, and that was this group called the Chabad Lubavitch.
Oh, yes.
Now, what do you know about the Chabad Lubavitch?
Very little, because, you know, they work behind the scenes. They stay out of sight. You only hear about the Lubavitches up in the New York area and in Israel itself sometimes, but they don't have any public relations agents whatsoever.
Are they the real guys, the real people behind the throne?
Oh, yeah. They're the manipulators. They pull the strings.
And even with the bankers, the banking arm is what I've discovered is that the banking arm of the Rothschilds and the banking arm of Warburg and even the Federal Reserve is the political arm, and then these rabbis are the kind of the brains behind it, or the spiritual arm. And there's kind of two camps within this hydra here, the two-headed hydra, I think.
Oh, yes, it's a two-headed hydra.
Well,
they have different functions throughout the system, but they're all working. And they managed to work together.
They have managed to work together, and there is truth somewhere that they've created the CFR, Council on Foreign Relations. They've created the Illuminati group. They've actually supported Freemasonry over time. But those are just sub-organizations of these people, aren't they?
Oh, yeah, they're different manifestations, but they're all working toward the same goal.
Now, do the people in those organizations, by and large, know the goal?
I don't think any of them know anything. Council on Foreign Relations, I've never heard that anybody at the Council on Foreign Relations really knows anything about anything.
Well, how could it be?
Figureheads.
How could it be that a guy like myself, after a year, would end up at the truth, and people who've investigated this for many years don't get there? I have to wonder if these people are actually investigating, or are they just covering up?
Most is cover-ups. Because if you really investigate it, you'd be absolutely sure to find out something eventually. But these people never find out anything. CFR and Illuminati and so forth, they'll never reveal any of their discoveries to anybody.
Now, here's the interesting thing too. George Bush displays all these signs of mysticism with his waving to the crowd with the devil horn thing, and he's got other
the no-hide laws and all those things. Yeah.
Well, what is this? I mean, this devil wave that all these elites do. Does that just does it mean anything, or is it just a
Well,
nonsense?
I think these are secret signals to the Gnostics, the people who know. And you can give them certain signs, and they know that you know, and that's it.
And is George part of the crew, or is he one of the Noahide people? He's a Gentile, isn't he?
Well, he's supposedly a Gentile, but he's related to the British throne. And it's pretty well established that his family has been on occult operations for 500 years.
Well, because he's involved in that, does that make him eligible to be spared by these organizers when they bring the curtain down on what goes on?
When things get to a certain stage, nobody's going to be spared. They have to get rid of everybody.
And who's going to be left standing? Just the Jewish group?
Just the insiders, the real insiders. You see, I've told the audiences for years that the Harriman family was lackeys of the Rothschilds, and that the Bush family was lackeys of the Harrimans. And that's the whole story. These are just lackeys. They don't matter. They'll get rid of them anytime they feel like it.
Yeah. Well, I wonder sometimes, Eustace, you know, I've got over 150 files out on the Internet. Many of them touch the truth very, very pointedly. And does that insulate me in any way from their attack, or at least a little bit?
It does somewhat. You see, people used to wonder why I was killed years ago because I exposed the old Federal Reserve racket. And the answer was, if they killed me, it said that I'd already put the word out. If he killed me after the fact, it would only publicize my work even more.
Well, I've come to that conclusion as well here because...
Yeah, there's a certain insulation that you get from that. So it's just as well to take a very forward position and hold it.
Well, I know that holding it is the key here, and I also know that, I've actually grown in numbers from leaving Genesis and actually shrinking. And that's an interesting fact because I believe the country and the world are hungry for these facts.
Oh, everybody's hungry for the facts. And that's the reason that my books lasted over everybody, because nobody else was telling the truth. They were giving them little glimmers of the truth. But you can't live on glimmers. You've got to have the whole truth. And that's what I always try to give people.
Well, you can trust me, Eustace, to do the whole deal because you know what? I got the story. I'm giving it to the public, and I got to tell you something. It's a dangerous game. They've been threatening my other guests not to come on my programming. They've actually, I'm certain, have done things to some of my researchers. That's the only thing that could explain some of the bizarre reactions I've been getting from people. I'm wondering, what they must be planning to something quite soon because they're actually looking like they're panicking.
I think they are panicking because for the first time they see the light going out at the end of the tunnel.
Well, it's because of the efforts of people like you setting the stage for this, Eustace, and I got to tell you.
Well, we've been working a long time, and it's really beginning to pay off.
Are there places in the world who are on our side quite convincingly, or are they in command almost everywhere?
No, I think that all over the world there's people on our side, and people have always been on our side. That's why America's always been a beacon light of freedom to the entire world, because everybody knew, and they never questioned it, that this is the land of liberty. And that's why the Zionists had to come over here and take it over.
Well, they have, haven't they, though? They've done us in, haven't they?
They've done us in, but if we survive this, we can survive anything.
Well, I know that their plans are to eliminate massive numbers of people. They have a population reduction strategy because we are considered Esau or Goyim, and we are less than these people.
Oh, yes.
Is that their goal?
Oh, yes, that's animals. To reduce us all to animals. George Orwell's one of his most famous books was Animal Farm.
Yeah.
He was reflecting this philosophy in that book.
Well, interesting when I noticed that these people actually, have the nerve in our country to call criticism of certain people in the Jewish community anti-Semitism, when 90% of the Jewish community of Ashkenazis are not even Semitic.
Oh no, they're Turco-Edomites and Khazars, and that's it. They have no roots in the land of the present land called Israel whatsoever.
And so the promised land that God promised the Israelites was never promised to these people.
Well, nobody's ever seen the contract, and we don't know whose name is on it.
Well, I happen to agree with that as well. But, here's the thing, though. They have such control over news and can exert so much control over leadership. What is your guess on how they've been able to do that? My guess is, and maybe you can mirror this or expand on it, is they have used, they could get people compromised early in their careers. Let's say...
Oh, yes, well, the Panama, after the Panama Canal, they involve you in a scandal early in your career, and then they control you the rest of your career.
And it could be sexual, it could be financial, it could be anything, but
it could be anything, yeah. But the way they control them now, they're into everything. It's sexual, and it's alcohol and drugs and everything. They do it all.
And a lot of the child pornography and whatnot is from these people as well, isn't it?
Oh, pedophilia. Pedophilia is one of the biggest rackets in the world. Father Flanagan's Boys Town was actually the headquarters for pedophilia in the United States for many years. It became the most lucrative charity and philanthropy in the United States because so many millionaires were pouring money into it.
Really?
Oh, yes. They were flying planes all over the United States, planefuls of boys to entertain politicians and millionaires.
Why does that make me so I feel vomitous just to hear you say those.
Well, it's so shocking, and to think that so many young lives are being destroyed like this, it's enough to blow your mind.
Well, this is one of the reasons why most people can't wrap their brain around this conspiracy and the fact that they would be involved in pedophilia or they would be involved in a world takeover of these people, because it's such a big conspiracy, Eustace. How do we shrink this conspiracy down to the common man size so they can start digesting just how dangerous things really are?
Well, we can't shrink it down, but we've got to make people realize the enormity of the situation. I mean, I was just a little country boy, and I went to Washington and New York and Los Angeles, and I saw all this life at first hand. And it never fazed me. It was shocking, but it never got me down at all. I was never depressed by it.
Well, I'm not depressed by it. I am feeling the urgency of the hour here to get this information out, because I do know they are getting backed into a corner, and when you corner a nest of rats, they have a tendency to strike out.
Well, rabid wolves can be very dangerous.
We have an update this evening on that Iowa immigration raid we first told you about last weekend. Hundreds of people rallied in Postville, Iowa this afternoon to protest the sweep that turned the life of the small town upside down. And that's tonight's Sunday cover. More fallout and new charges in the aftermath of the Postville raid. It was the largest single immigration raid in the country. 700 warrants, 300 arrests. Agri-processors, a kosher meatpacking plant, lost 3/4 of its workforce. And tiny Postville, Iowa?
I would say we lost a good third of our people, and that's a pretty substantial hit.
Businesses that had served the Hispanic community struggled or shuttered. The meatpacking plant scrambled to replace 700 workers, at one point busing in the homeless from Texas.
This has not created anything good for the community. It's created division, hurt, harm.
Most of those arrested are serving 5-month sentences for identity theft. But some 40 women, along with their 90 children, are still living in Postville, awaiting a court date. Unable to work, the families are completely dependent on St. Bridget's Catholic Church for food, rent money, and medical care.
They took my husband and left me with my 3 sons, and I can't work. It makes you feel humiliated, and we didn't do anything bad. All we did was come here to work.
Maria Cruz has to wear a tracking bracelet 24 hours a day and cannot leave Iowa until her case comes to trial. Maria also told CBS News that after the raid, her last paycheck was missing 20 hours of overtime, and she was not paid for 2 weeks of vacation time she had earned. Money she desperately needs now. 2 agri-processor managers are facing indictment for assisting plant workers in getting fake identity cards. The Labor Department is investigating the plant for child labor violations. The Equal Employment Opportunity Commission is looking into sexual harassment charges. And lawyers for the immigrants are working on a lawsuit over wage and hour violations.
The line behind us was dangerous. It was all sharp knives.
It was the dirtiest, unsafest plant I've ever been in.
Many of Father Paul Odekirk's parishioners worked at agri-processors. He has toured the plant and says workers there were routinely mistreated.
We're dealing with them. We've seen the kid without the 3 fingers and the one with his hand missing. When I was a pastor here, I took how many people to the doctor because of cuts?
Agri-processors would not discuss any pending litigation, but says it has begun to make changes in the plant.
We have hired a compliance officer that was reported to everybody, and I'm not going to get into the details, but I think it was reported that there was many new and improved systems.
Still, that's not enough for Father Paul.
So they have a responsibility to this whole community that they never really lived up to. They painted a good picture with words, but their actions spoke a different story.
A delegation from the Congressional Hispanic Caucus went to Postville yesterday and heard some 3 hours of testimony from former workers and family members.
Rescued from the Reich is the story of Rabbi Joseph Schneerson, head of the Hasidic Lubavitcher movement, who escaped to America in 1940. This talk is an hour and a half.
I have what people today call ADHD, or Attention Deficit Hyperactivity Disorder. Back when I was a kid, it was called HLD, hyperkinesis learning disabled, or MBD, minimal brain dysfunction. I also had a speech impediment when I was a kid. I got my T's and F's mixed up all the time, so when I played with my trucks around my family's friends, it was quite interesting conversation. Or when I asked the babysitter to tuck me into bed, my mom was beside herself with grief going, "Oh, vey, you know, what am I going to do with this kid?" So after I failed first grade twice and started having these creative language skills, my mom realized she had to do something very quickly. She had this nightmare that her 20-year-old son would be able to eventually drive himself to his own 6th grade graduation if she didn't do something. So she started looking around the area in Dallas-Fort Worth, where we lived, to find a special school for me. And she found one at Texas Christian University called Star Point. And it was a lab school that focused on severely learning disabled children. I met all the requirements. A lot of people don't realize that artificial flavors and artificial colors and preservatives, they're petroleum-based products. You're actually eating oil when you eat them. BHT, which is in a lot of cereal, that's actually formaldehyde. That's what they use them bomb bodies with. So when I would eat that with the sensitive system that I had, it would make me go haywire. So I tell you this information again to give you a little background on my person, and also to let you understand that when I started researching about a Nazi soldier rescuing the head of Lubavitch, the most Orthodox rabbi in 1939 out of Europe, and most of my professors told me, "Hey, you're not going to find anything," that contrarian kicked in. I said, "Hey, I'll look into it and see what I find." So now to my research. In 1992, I began researching the phenomenon about Jews and men of Jewish descent who served in the German armed forces during World War II, the results of which were published in 2002 as Hitler's Jewish soldiers. During the course of this research, I came across this story about our anti-Semitic, anti-refugee U.S. government working with the Nazi Secret Service to rescue a rabbi. And what makes the story even more incredible is that the person that the German Secret Service used to rescue the rabbi was a half-Jewish German major who had been Aryanized by Hitler. Now, ladies and gentlemen, tonight I'll be using terms like half-Jew, quarter-Jew, Aryan. Please have these terms in quotation marks in your mind's eyes. They are Nazi terms, but they help us understand the history from back then. And when I first came across this story, as one can well imagine, I doubted the validity of it. But further research has proved the truth of it. And it has been a wild journey that has brought me in touch with some wonderful professors and historians of the Third Reich, like Jonathan Steinberg, Michael Barabaum, David Kranzler, and Henry Feingold. It also has brought me in touch with several Wehrmacht veterans of Jewish descent. Wehrmacht is the German term for the armed forces of World War II. And has brought me in touch with numerous rabbis of one of the most ultra-Orthodox Jewish sects, the Lubavitchers. Now, some of you might be asking, if this story is so incredible, why hasn't it been documented until now? Well, the Lubavitchers are a very ahistorical group. They look at this in a very spiritual way. And many of them have not looked into it in depth. Also, the documents are spread out all over the world, and so many of them have just, carried on the oral tradition that God saved the Rebbe, and that's basically the explanation that was good enough for them. Also, some historians and journalists have touched upon this rescue, but usually only in a few pages or a few paragraphs. To the best of my knowledge, this is the first historical account to synthesize sources from the Lubavitchers, documents from the archives, National Archives in America, as well as Germany, and written in oral testimonies into a single book. Much of what I'm about to tell you has never been told before. And in order to write this book, I had to go over 10,000 pages of documents, read over 60 books of the secondary literature, interview over 60 individuals, and collect hundreds of photographs. Now, in order for you to understand this rescue, you must have a fundamental understanding of the Lubavitchers and their arch leader, the Rebbe. The ultra-Orthodox Jewish sect, known as the Lubavitchers, had its origins in the Hasidic movement, which began around 1730 under the charismatic leadership of the Baal Shem Tov. Hasidic is the Hebrew word for pious. Now, the Baal Shem Tov came on the scene when when Eastern European Jewry was suffering a lot of hardships. They had undergone the trauma of the false crusade of Sabbatai Tzvi, the false Messiah crusade of Sabbatai Tzvi in 1666, and they had been devastated by pogroms in Poland and Russia. So they were hungering for a better future and for a better way to connect with God. And the Baal Shem Tov tapped into their desires with amazing power, and by the end of his life in 1760, the Hasidic movement numbered into the hundreds of thousands. This Hasidic movement is somewhat akin to what happened here in America with the Great Awakening, of what the Baal Shem Tov was able to do for Eastern European Jewry. Now, soon after his death, several of his closest disciples spread out through Eastern Europe, and they set up their own schools of theology and their own Hasidic sects. One of them was Rebbe Shneur Zalman of Lydia, who set up his headquarters in Lubavitch, Russia, hence the term the Lubavitchers. Now, the Lubavitchers believe that, like other Hasidic sects, that their Rebbe and their philosophy, their Chabad philosophy, were incomparable. Chabad is an acronym for the Hebrew words Chokhmah, Bina, and Dat, meaning wisdom, understanding, and knowledge. And these are Kabbalistic terms, or Jewish mystical terms. And the Lubavitchers believe that every Jew should have a deep and mystical connection with God and have a thorough understanding of the 613 commandments that God has given every Jew to fulfill in his or her life. And although Messianism has been a constant theme of Judaism the last 2,000 years, the Lubavitchers focus much more on the Messiah and what each Jew must do to hasten his arrival than other Hasidic sects. And this has caused some controversy recently when Menachem Mendel Schneerson, the 7th Lubavitcher Rebbe, passed away with no heir apparent, and many in the community declared that he was indeed the Mashiach, or the Messiah. Also, since the beginning of this group, each Rebbe has focused heavily on outreach programs, building up Chabad houses all over the world, as they call them. As many of you know who have had contact with Lubavitch, there's not a corner on this world without a Lubavitcher Chabad house. I saw a cartoon recently that illustrates that point dramatically. It shows a picture of Mars, and as you look at this cartoon, it says underneath, intelligent life has been found on the red planet. And as you look over the horizon, you see the golden rings of McDonald's, and then next to it you see a Chabad house. So they have really been amazing with their outreach program. Now, I've used the term Rebbe several times, and many people have asked me about this word. The term Rebbe is a variation of the word rabbi, which means my teacher or my leader, and is the title given to heads of Hasidic courts. While there can be many rabbis in one Hasidic community, there usually can be only one Rebbe, somewhat akin to the Catholic community where you can have one pope but many priests. And in the Hasidic community, the leadership of a Rebbe is usually dynastic. Now, the Lubavitchers believe that their Rebbes are endowed with mystical powers and are the potential messiahs of their generations. Now, for most observant Jews, every generation has a potential messiah. The Lubavitchers just believe that if the messiah is going to come, it's going to indeed be their Rebbe. They also believe that their Rebbe is endowed with the Holy Spirit, the Ruach HaKodesh, and is without sin. Elie Wiesel, a noted Holocaust writer and survivor and Nobel Peace Prize winner, eloquently describes what these Rebbes are. He says, "He is what can be, what man wants to be. He is the chosen one who is denied nothing in heaven or on earth. God is angry. He can make him smile. God is severe. He can induce him to leniency." The Lubavitchers also believe that their Rebbes intellectually know and emotionally feel the spiritual and physical needs of every Jew everywhere and know how to connect him or her to God and reveal his or her role in the divine blueprint of humanity. So for members of Chabad, they believe that their Rebbes are not only perfect human beings, but prophetic figures worthy of total submission. Elie Wiesel goes on to explain that in Hasidim, the Rebbe, by the virtue of the strength he incarnates and the majesty he invokes, is the father figure par excellence. Someone good yet strict, someone charitable yet severe, tolerant with others, but inflexible with himself. In other words, a singular human being in whom all attributes converge and in whom all contradictions are resolved. The Lubavitchers also believe that their Rebbes, once dead, unlike other Jews who have died, are closer to heaven, to God, and are still able to hear the requests of people down here on earth. And as a result, many Lubavitchers go to the grave sites of their Rebbes and leave prayer requests there so that they may be heard more quickly. When our story starts to unfold in the 1930s, 6th generation of Schneerson family members had led the movement of Lubavitch as Rebbes. And the current leader was the 6th Lubavitcher Rebbe, Joseph Isaac Schneerson, who was born in 1880 in Lubavitch, Russia, and assumed command of the leadership in 1920 on the death of his father. He came on the scene as leader of Lubavitch when Russian Jewry was having a lot of difficulties. Most Lubavitchers at this time were living in Russia. And since the Soviet Union had taken over power, they had outlawed a lot of religious organizations and religious education. And this was one of the core tenets of Lubavitch. In Lubavitch, most Lubavitchers are very stubborn, and they refused to obey these decrees, and as a result, many of them were arrested and sent off to gulags in Siberia and killed. The Rebbe himself was arrested several times, beaten up horribly in jail, and in 1927, he was condemned to death. But before the death sentence was carried out, several prominent individuals throughout the world, one of them being Leo Baeck, famous Reform rabbi in Germany, Leo Baeck, and even our president in the United States, President Coolidge, wrote on his behalf. Under this pressure, the Rebbe was released. But the Soviet Union was tired of the Rebbe's shenanigans, and they kicked him out of the country. And he went to Riga, Latvia, where he became a Latvian citizen, but then soon thereafter he moved down to Warsaw, Poland, where he set up his headquarters outside of the capital in a town called Otwock. Now, by 1939, his new headquarters there had spread out its tentacles all throughout the world. In America at this time, according to Lubavitch sources, there was around 150,000 Lubavitchers here. And also this headquarters was doing a lot of work clandestinely, of course, to support communities in Russia. In 1939, the Rebbe was 59 years old, and he was not in very good health, probably due to all the persecution he had suffered under the Soviets. He had suffered a heart attack and a stroke, and he was sick with multiple sclerosis, a degenerative disease of the central nervous system, symptoms of which range from paralysis, numbness, to incontinence, all of which the Rebbe seemed to suffer from. He also had difficulty moving around. He had to be put in a wheelchair to go from one point to another, and he also had to be helped up from chairs and out from cars. He also had difficulty speaking. When he did speak, it sounded like he was mumbling, and his volume was not very high. Also adding to his ill health was the fact that he was overweight, and he smoked over a pack of cigarettes a day. There wasn't a lot of knowledge back then about the dangers of smoking. Standing at 5'8" and weighing over 200 pounds, he didn't strike a very impressive figure physically. Yet his followers thought of him as an incredible spiritual giant. Our story begins on the 1st of September, 1939, when Germany invaded Poland. And as 1.5 million German troops crossed over the border into Poland, 3.3 million Jews lived in that nation. By 1945, only a few 100,000 of those Jews had survived the Shoah, had survived the Holocaust. With this in mind, one sees that half of the 6 million Jews who died in the Holocaust were Polish Jews. Hitler's blitzkrieg tactics quickly overwhelmed the Polish nation, preventing most Jews from escaping. Behind his military legions came his killing squads that quickly implemented his worldview of doing away with undesirables, like socialists, priests, members of the intelligentsia, and Jews. Many of these barbaric acts were done in front of Wehrmacht commanders who surprisingly decided to protest these acts. One of them was the head of the German Secret Service, the Abwehr, Admiral Wilhelm Canaris. And he believed that these atrocities defamed the German nation and that these units should be removed from Poland at once. Now, when these protests reached Hitler, Hitler declared that our struggle must not be measured by terms of legality or illegality. Our methods must conform to our principles. We must prevent a new Polish intelligentsia from seizing power and rid the Greater German Reich of Polish and Jewish riffraff. With such a policy in place, the Jews of Poland quickly fell into the abyss of the Holocaust. Jews who would survive in Poland during World War II did so by passing themselves off as Aryans, as the Nazis would call them, serving with the partisans, or surviving the ghettos and death camps. And one of the most remarkable rescues, or escapes if you will, from Nazi Germany and Nazi-occupied Europe in World War II was the escape of Joseph Isaac Schneerson, head of Lubavitch, and he did so with the help of Abwehr agents, with the help of German Secret Service agents. Now, as I studied this story, the more I came to really believe that truth is indeed stranger than fiction. And to set that tone, I'd like to tell you the following story. A little boy comes home from Hebrew school, and his mother asks him, "Hey, Johnny, what did you learn today?" And Johnny says, "You know, Mom, I really don't want to talk about it." And she's like, "No, Johnny, I'd be interested. Come on, tell me, hon, what did you learn?" He's like, "Well, Mom, we learned about this guy by the name of Moses. And he was in Egypt at the time, and he was tired of the way the Egyptians were treating the Jews, so he gathered all the Jews together. There was a few million of them, Mom, and he escaped from Egypt. And then they came up to the Red Sea, and suddenly they heard that the Egyptian army was coming after them, Mom, and going to kill them. So Moses, he got on his walkie-talkie, and he called in the Israeli Air Force to bomb and strafe the Egyptians. And while the Air Force, Mom, was bombing and strafing the Egyptians, he had his pioneers build this huge pontoon bridge across the Red Sea. And then he got the millions and millions of Israelites across that pontoon bridge, across the Red Sea on the other side. And then, Mom, he put satchel charges all along that bridge. And then when the Egyptians came on that bridge, he had those satchel charges blown up. The Egyptians, Mom, they can't swim. So when they fell in the water, they all drowned. And that's why we have the state of Israel today. The mom looks down at Johnny, says, "Johnny, is that what you really learned in Hebrew school today?" Johnny looked down at the ground, kind of shuffled his feet, and he says, "No, Mom, but if I told you the truth, you wouldn't believe it."
This is the last question. And then what we're going to do is we're going to walk around and say hello to everybody, and then we're going to go back to the ranch. Yes, ma'am.
My name is Judy Swenson, and I'm in 7th grade.
7th grade.
And
Good.
if you do go to Russia, are you going to be taking some kids from Crawford?
No.
Я вам очень благодарен за этот вопрос.
I'm extremely grateful for you for this question.
Аудитория начала с этого вопроса практически, и вы закончили этот вопрос.
The whole audience basically started on this note, and you finalized the whole thing with your question.
Это не случайно.
This is not a mere coincidence, I believe.
Мне президент говорит, приезжай, когда у нас здесь плюс 40, я тебя запишу в клуб. Я здесь создал клуб 40. Мы бегаем, когда 40 градусов жары, мы здесь бегаем несколько миль.
When on our way here, the president invited to come here when it's plus 40 Celsius, more than 110, and he invited me to join a plus 40 club who jog when it is 110 and more.
Я подумаю еще.
Well, I'll think about it.
Но у нас действительно в некоторых регионах страны, там, где люди живут, в Сибири, вот в этом году, допустим, прошлой зимой, температура 2 недели держалась минус 50.
Indeed, in our country, there are regions where people live, by the way, in Siberia, where for last year, for 2 weeks in a row, the temperatures were around or below minus 50 Celsius for 2 weeks running.
Я вам обещаю, что я в такие условия президента не помещу.
My promise is I will not terrorize your president with such low temperatures.
Но